Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Educators and students throughout the state demonstrate to protest drastic budget cuts, calling for lawmakers to extend tax increases. California's population has become older and more ethnically diverse. That's according to a new census data. The state's high-speed rail gets a boost from federal funding, but is expected to cost more than planned. And in a Climate Watch conversation, how business can benefit from environmentally sustainable practices. That's coming up next.
For 30 years.
Good evening, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me now on our news panel are Michael Cabanatan, staff writer with the San Francisco Chronicle, and Scott Schaefer, host of the California Report on KQED Public Radio. Jill Tucker, education reporter, also with the San Francisco Chronicle. So Jill, tell us this week's demonstrations by teachers in hopes of getting the legislature to change its position on more money for schools. How has it gone?
Well, there definitely have been a lot of teachers, a lot of parents, a lot of children out on the streets. Right now, as we speak, there's a rally going on at Civic Center in San Francisco, and they have been out in pajamas in the morning and rallying at malls in the afternoon. But when you talk to Republicans, they keep saying, I'm not changing my mind about new taxes. So how much long-term effect it's going to have in getting their way for these increased and extended taxes, I'm not hearing that Republicans are changing their mind because teachers are at the Civic Center right now. However, the Republicans are saying that they're willing to give more money, this additional revenue that California is now seeing from a slightly better economy, that they want that to go to the schools. So we are seeing at least some movement of making sure that schools don't have more cuts, which I think for the schools, the people in schools, they want that revenue and increased taxes to backfill cuts that they've made $18 billion in cuts over the last few years.
It's interesting, though. We use the term increased taxes, but we're really not talking about increased taxes. Are we talking about an extension of taxes that we're already paying, or are there now some new taxes that have been added?
They want both. I mean, there's extension. I mean, extensions are the primary thing to keep the money flowing in that's coming in now. They'd also like to see some new taxes to really help backfill the cuts that have been made over the last few years. But really, they take those extended taxes that are set to expire at the end of June.
You know, you said that so far Republican legislators don't seem swayed, which is not a big surprise. These are union employees, essentially, not a good fit with Republicans. But I wonder, is this in part aimed at sort of humanizing the issue and getting the public to be more engaged by seeing these teachers out there? Teachers tend to have a very high rating, you know, among voters, and might that be the real audience, hoping that maybe they'll get stirred up and call their legislator?
You know, I think so, except, you know, what I keep hearing from a lot of people is, oh my gosh, every week there seems to be a rally at some school district, you know, across the Bay Area or the state, or at many. And so there seems to be a little bit of a fatigue factor of this same message, schools are cut, and in many places they're on board already. In San Francisco, believe me, they've been to Sacramento, they've written their legislators. You know, it's places like, you know, in some of the Central Valley and Orange County and more Republican areas, but that's not where these big rallies are. They are advertising there, but you're not seeing that same sort of personal passion coming out with the parents on the street. So how much incentive is it for those legislators in those communities? You know, they're not hearing it as loudly on their streets as they are in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and the Democratic strongholds, definitely.
Just kind of a curmudgeonly question. If they were out there protesting, who was teaching the classes?
Well, There were a bunch of teachers that went to Sacramento on Monday. They left their classrooms to substitutes that were paid for by the union. The teachers' salaries were paid normally by the school district. It's allowed under labor negotiations, but it did irk some Republicans and some other people thinking, look, we already have shortened school years because of budget cuts, and now these teachers are leaving their classroom to go play politics in Sacramento. They say these are desperate times requiring desperate measures, so we need to be there, we need to be banging drums, we need to get arrested, we need to do all these things. A lot of the things happened before and after school, so some teachers, hundreds of teachers were out, but not thousands and thousands. Yeah.
Well, you can certainly appreciate the passion, but how effective are these clearly choreographed protests?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I think that there is a sense of protest fatigue to a certain degree. It starts feeling that that's the same message. The union said, look, this is a week-long state of emergency. We are going to hammer it home. There isn't going to be a resident in this state that doesn't see a teacher or a child or a commercial, and we think that that is going to make a difference.
We didn't even get to the CSUs, the California State Universities, or higher education. That's where at first we were hearing lots of fight back. What's happening there?
The CSU this week, it came out and said, look, if we have a worst case scenario, we're talking about doubling our tuition to $7,400 tuition and fees. That's doubled in 3 years. They're saying that all cuts budget, that worst case scenario, that would mean raising tuition 32% on top of 10%. They're really, these numbers actually, I think, really shook up a lot more people to a certain degree than maybe some of these protests out there, because it was so dramatic. You're talking about turning away 20,000 or to 85,000 students. So it's the CSU, I think you're going to, and UC even, you're going to be seeing more protests. I don't think that that's going to be ending either.
Well, Scott Schaefer, in the end, it's going to come down to where do citizens stand on this? Because teachers want there to be a vote. But who are the people they need to be appearing to? You have data on who Californians are today.
Well, that's right. There was some new census data that was released this week, and we had a big data dump a few months ago that showed that, no surprise, big increase in Asian Americans here in California, big increase in Latinos. And this week we got additional detail. And one of the things that stood out was that there are fewer children in California, especially between the ages of 5 and 14. Although California has added 3 million people over the past decade, we have about 250,000 fewer kids in that age range. And what that tells you is that people who are of childbearing age are leaving California, or they're choosing not to have kids, either because it's too expensive or they're looking for work in other states. And as we're having this conversation about education, education cuts, that also, I think, influences where people want to raise their children. Do they want to raise them in a state that seems to have a chronic budget problem, where schools are underfunded, where teachers are being laid off? And so these things are very much, I think, related to each other.
Well, and it makes me wonder about sort of political shifts that might be coming down the road, maybe not so much to a state full of Republicans, but a state where an aging population, we already know the baby boomers are getting old, and now we're talking about a state where we don't have a lot of kids, so we're going to have more percentage-wise of an older population, and their interests certainly are going to be in many of the services that we're talking about cutting under any budget scenario, whether that's Medi-Cal, and so health, social services, all these things that senior citizens rely on to get by later in life.
Right, and we've had, as we've seen fewer children, we're seeing an explosion of people over the age of 65 and 60, baby boomers getting older. And who's going to pay for those services? It's the younger, it's the generation before and the one before that. And if you don't have enough of those now kids who will become taxpayers and job holders and home buyers down the road, you have a real problem.
And what we hear from business interests, particularly in Silicon Valley, is that they can't find enough qualified, trained people to fill the jobs where jobs are being created that would help the economy and get more money into the budget. We're seeing it sort of in
it's kind of a nasty
position.
cycle, because you've got this high unemployment rate. There are employers, like you say, in Silicon Valley and elsewhere that are looking for high skill workers, and they have to go outside the state or sometimes outside the country, to find those folks.
And the education folks, actually coming back to that, they say, look, if we're not funding education, we're not educating, we're not producing a workforce, and if we have the lowest funded schools in the country, people won't want to send their kids here. They're going to move out of state. So it really is this crazy, vicious cycle.
Yeah, I was talking to a demographer down at USC this week, Dal Myers, and he was pointing out that because the younger generation is different demographically, they're more Latino, more Asian, that older folks don't relate to them in the same way, and they feel maybe that they don't owe them anything. Those were his words, and therefore there's less support among that age range for schools and the other kinds of services that younger kids really need. And it's kind of this weird disconnect that's somewhat understandable generationally and ethnically, racially, but down the road it's going to be a problem if that gap really continues.
Don't we also have growth in areas, when we say Latino and we say Asian, but in specific groups that are growing faster than others within that breakdown?
Yeah, I mean, within the Latino category, the vast majority, not majority, but the biggest group are Mexicans. There's a lot of folks coming from Central America as well. And among Asians, Chinese and Taiwanese are the biggest segment, and then I think Filipino also, so it's Asian Pacific Islander. But there are also implications in politics too, because if you look at who these younger people are, 50%, or I think it's more than 50% of people 18 and younger are Latino in California. Those are future voters. And that of course has implications in California for the Republican Party in particular, which is at this point at least not really appealing to that segment of the population. So there's down the road that it kind of highlights, I think, the problems that they face politically in California.
Where do they live?
They live everywhere. Interestingly, the most growth among Latinos was not in the coastal counties, but it was more in the inland counties: Riverside, San Bernardino, Sacramento, Solano. And so we were seeing, and it's true across the country, you're seeing more Asians and Latinos in places like North Carolina and states that we didn't typically see those, at least in the first wave of immigrants. But now they're spreading out and they're living just not only throughout California, but throughout the country.
Which brings us really to Michael's story, and that's about transportation to get from those places that are growing in the center of the country. So your story tonight's about getting us onto a train that moves faster than what we're accustomed to.
Well, 220 miles per hour, quite a bit faster, about 140 miles faster than trains go now. This week was a big week for high-speed rail. It was November of 2008 that Californians voted. It was a close vote, but they voted to invest $10 billion in a high-speed rail system. Now it was projected even then to cost about $43 billion, so some of the money was going to have to come from elsewhere. But the week started off well for high-speed rail. They had already collected, I think, about $3.2 billion from the federal government. They got another $300 million. It was money that Florida had turned down. From there, that allowed them to extend it. Originally, people joked about the train to nowhere. They started going from Borden to just north of Fresno, and Borden is a little town sort of near Madera. And it's where high-speed rail would start heading south through the valley after it goes over the Pacheco Pass and makes it into the valley. And it would go to the edge of Fresno. Then they got a little more money and it went to Bakersfield. Then it went to downtown Bakersfield. Now they got more and it goes to Chowchilla. And the significance of it going to Chowchilla is that's the point, they call it a Y. It's the point where the tracks go north, but they also head west. And it would be the sort of the first step of the connection to the Bay Area.
But the legislative analysts this week kind of put a damper on that happy news of getting Florida's money by basically giving some recommendations about, well, gee, maybe we should rethink about where that rail should go. Maybe it should not start in the middle of the state and instead start in San Francisco or Los Angeles or something like that, and really gave some recommendations that some people perceived would or could kill the entire thing. Is that a possibility, or is there support for sort of that idea of shifting the entire focus of this?
It's kind of hard to tell. I mean, there are a lot of people right now who are critical of high-speed rail, who say we can't afford it now, or they don't like the specifics of the plan. The fact that it goes through their backyard, or that it would cut through their farm fields, making it harder for them to, to harvest their crops and so on. But the people in the state of California voted, the people voted to build a high-speed rail system, and so there is this mandate out there, and there's also a federal mandate or a federal interest in building high-speed rail, and so it seems that most people believe that it should move forward, but even the critics are saying, we should still build it, but we have to be more careful about how we build it.
Wasn't there also a surprise, to me, surprising recommendation from the legislative analyst, I believe it was, or one of the review groups, that the management structure now trying to put this together was not doing a good job, and maybe Caltrans should take over?
Right. The legislative analyst said two things. Number one was that maybe we shouldn't start in the Central Valley. Why don't we start in Southern California, LA to Anaheim, or the Bay Area, San Francisco to San Jose, or maybe even San Jose to the Central Valley. The second thing was, you guys aren't really doing a very good job. You were set up to promote high-speed rail. Now it's time to plan it and build it. Let's give it to Caltrans. As much as they're criticized, they're used to dealing with the public and not just selling a job, but telling people why this is the best way to go, why it's the best thing to do, and they're also good at purchasing property.
It's fine for the LAO to criticize it. That's what they do. They analyze these things. But who is the High-Speed Rail Authority accountable to? I mean, who do they really answer to if there are inefficiencies, if they're not doing the right outreach? Who reins them in or tells them what to do?
Basically, the legislature. The members of the High-Speed Rail Authority are appointed by the governor and by the legislature. And the legislature does have the ultimate power. Even with the bond money, it has to be approved on an annual basis and released to the High-Speed Rail Authority. That was another thing that the LAO said was, instead of the $185 million that you want this year in order to continue all your contracts, you should just get about $7.5 million that would allow you to keep your general office operations going.
So we got this extra money from Florida. Florida turned it down for what reason, I'm not sure. But that's not making anybody happy.
Well, it does make the people at the High-Speed Rail Authority happy. It allows them to build another 20 miles of track, and every mile is a good thing. But there are still critics who call it the train to nowhere because they say, well, who would want to ride from Chowchilla to Bakersfield? But the point is, they're not really planning on building that. The chief executive officer of High-Speed Rail says, look, I was assigned to build a statewide high-speed rail system. You got to start somewhere. Why not start where it's straight and it's flat, there's less development, fewer problems, and you can run 220 miles an hour?
Okay, well, it's still sort of on track.
Who knows? Maybe the slow track.
This week, investors, executives, and environmentalists from the world over gathered in Oakland to share ways that businesses can increase their environmental sustainability practices. In this Climate Watch conversation, senior editor Craig Miller speaks with Mindy Lubber, president of Boston-based Ceres, and the organizers behind the conference.
Mindy Lubber, welcome.
Thank you.
Recently called one of the 100 most influential people in corporate governance. There's a list I wouldn't mind being on. But primarily, you are president of this organization known as Ceres. So for those in our audience for whom that may not be on their radar, what is Ceres about?
Simply put, Ceres is about bringing sustainability issues to the capital markets, to the private sector, helping companies and investors integrate sustainability, climate change, water shortages, all sorts of environmental and social issues into the bottom line of what companies and investors do and how they think about things.
This week's conference in Oakland, organized by Ceres, was supposedly working toward, quote, a truly sustainable global economy, but very much within the capitalist model. And there are some out there who think that's sort of an oxymoron, how can that be?
Well, the bottom line is companies need to be concerned about things like climate change and water shortages. Those things have bottom line financial impacts, clearly impact the shareholder value of those companies, and companies today who are not addressing how to deal with climate change or water shortages or using too many toxic chemicals are companies that get in trouble. We just need to look as far as Massey Coal, where there was an explosion of a coal mine, or the BP oil spill. Those companies took a huge financial bath as well as a reputational bath, because they weren't paying attention to issues that somehow they dismissed as environmental tree hugger issues.
So are you seeing some sort of epiphany going on, widespread, or?
Absolute change. I've been at this for 20 plus years, and I've been an environmental lawyer for 30 years. Companies and financial leaders understand that these issues are part of their bottom line. At the World Economic Forum, where international world leaders go from the corporate sector. Last year we had 200 leaders looking at sustainable consumption, how to make products using fewer resources, wasting less energy. 5 years ago we had 5 companies. It is changing, and it's real. It's not changing quickly enough. We have an enormous way to go, but we're seeing some fundamental changes happening right now. Speaking of change, China has an important presence at these conferences that Ceres puts on. And China is, the China-California, issue is often couched as a kind of fierce competition for the green or the clean technology market, and one that California is in danger of losing right now. Is that how you see it? Well, for sure the United States is losing the race, and that is a problem. I mean, climate change is about addressing the risk, but seizing the opportunity as well. The clean technology industry is going to be the fastest growing part of our economy. And in the United States, we should want a big part of that economy. A study last week said that China is by far the leader in producing clean energy technology, solar, wind, and others. They are creating jobs. They are creating a revenue base. The United States came in at 17. Now, that's not an enviable position, and that's not a place we want to be. The saving grace is California. California is moving forward, saying we're going to compete in that playing field. We're going to put more money into clean tech. We're going to bring jobs and industry here. And if there's one part of the country that's leading the way, it is California. But the United States cannot be 17th. We've got to change that. Well, let's talk a little bit about this leadership that we keep hearing about from California. There's a decision forthcoming from Washington, or a recommendation, I should say, on auto fuel efficiency standards out to the year 2025. California's been in the middle of this. How important is California's role? Let me put it another way. How much impact will this decision ultimately have? And would it even be happening were it not for California's sort of push in this direction? Well, there are a number of factors, but I don't want to ever underestimate the leadership of California. When the United States sees, and when other states see, one state could do it, they could lead, they could put in place new regulations that are more sustainability responsible, they're going to follow. And I think California's leadership is crucial in what the United States is doing. We've seen the United States pass some fuel economy standards, but we have got to catch up with California. And we are about to do that if, in fact, there's some forces don't try and roll that back. Well, and if you look at the carbon trading issue, the cap and trade program that California is trying to put in place to reduce carbon emissions, you find a lot of leadership, but not too many people following. This was supposed to be a regional program with half a dozen states and several Canadian provinces. As it stands, we have no other states in the United States with us, and a few Canadian provinces, most of which aren't even in the West, in this Western Climate Initiative, so-called. So, I mean, could this leadership at some point turn into sort of a fool's errand if nobody's following? Well, one is I think people are following. In the Northeast, we have something called the RGGI standard, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which tries to follow what California has done. There are other parts of the country moving forward. States are going to be the vanguard. States are where the play is right now. When Congress is enacting, we're seeing fuel efficiency standards, we're seeing clean energy standards, all enacted in the states, and many of them are looking to California for leadership. So California, if anything, positions us better to seize the clean energy economy and bring jobs and new revenue here to the United States. It's going to be California. You're a firm believer that the rules lead the money, the investment, the venture capital, that the money follows the rulemaking, the regulation. must have policy signals. Policy signals are crucial. When we talk about putting a price on carbon and a cap on carbon, several things happen. One is you finally have an honest accounting system. Carbon pollution costs a fortune. To say it's free is ridiculous, but that's how it's priced right now. So putting a price on it is key, and putting a cap on the amount that carbon could be emitted.
You said there's money sitting on the sidelines, waiting for this to happen.
And when you have a price signal, a cost on carbon and a limit, that's when the clean technology industry sector believes there's a real market here, that they're going to be able to build their technology in a way that's competitive. You know, Kevin Parker from Deutsche Bank was quoted last week as saying he's putting $7 billion of Deutsche Bank's money in clean energy and clean technology, and all of it outside of the United States because we don't have the right price signals, the right market signals.
Not even here.
California is the only place they're looking at, and it's because California has the right market signals. So in every way, from the risk side to the opportunity, California is going to benefit, and the other states are going to try and catch up.
All right. Well, keep a good thought. Mindy, Lubber, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
For joining us here tonight also. And remember that we are available anytime online at kqed.org/thisweek for past episodes and segments, and to subscribe to our newsletter and our podcast, and to share your thoughts about the program. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.
Funding for Climate Watch on This Week in Northern California is provided by the Mary Van Voorhees Fund and the Fallis Family Fund.